Good, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I wouldn't say good night because I have just given you a salutation. I am Joe Mukoko, host of the 360-degree brand story, a product of Akiko Stories. There are so many stories in this line. A product of Akiko Stories, a bi-weekly conversation on helping you and I improve our storytelling skills. And why is this important? Remember, we convert a customer one at a time. They purchase a product one at a time. They may have very many touch points, but the touch points only happen one at a time. So we make your brand come alive. And as we make your brand come alive, we also come alive. And it is part of the Afrikan MSME Collective, where we are helping African entrepreneurs be able to build scalable and sustainable businesses. Once again, I'm Joe Mukoko, your host, and on the hot seat. Okay, the weather in Nairobi is a bit chilly, cool around, but the city is still hot. Allow me to invite Chesubire Greg, my co-founder and founder of Akiko Stories, to tell us a story about herself. And I'm going to give her a challenge. This is how I would like you to introduce yourself. It's a storytelling conversation. Once upon a time. Introduce yourself with that.
Like really?
Yeah, like really.
Okay. It's going to be interesting. The thing about these conversations, they're hilarious every time. Okay, so once upon a time, there was a family of four, father, mother, and two children living in Uganda. And then things got really, really thick in the days of Idi Amin. And the family found that they were on the hit list, so they fled to Kenya. Shortly after they fled to Kenya, well, not that shortly, about 9 months after they fled to Kenya, a beautiful, hyper-independent, cute little girl was born. That's me. So I was born as the third of three. So I am the official last born, my mother's official last born. However, my mother has many other children she's adopted, so we make room for them. My name is Chesubire Talitwana Greg, and it's been interesting because, and Joe, you may not know this, I talked at 9 months and walked at 9 months. Put your glasses back on. I talked at 9 months and I walked at 9 months. However, from when I was 4 months, I didn't want to be carried. I would rather be left to sit on the floor. And interestingly, my mom always said that if I was her first child, she would never have had another one. But since I was number 3, she knew not all kids turned out like me. So yes, that is me, the youngest of 3. I think I'm the cheekiest probably of the 3. But it's also been very inspirational because I learned to negotiate early. I talked early and I learned to read early. So when people ask me if I went to private school, no, I went to private school in university. But because of the stuff I was reading and the conversations I was overhearing, I was that child and listen to every conversation and respond. Because of that, it triggered a desire for growth that has me now in the storytelling space.
Thank you very much, Chesubire. The reason why I wanted you to introduce yourself like that, I didn't even know that 9-month story. So this is good information for bio. I'm gathering data like the intelligence agencies, you know.
You are welcome.
Thank you. The reason why I had wanted you to introduce yourself is what we are discussing today and how impactful communication has a bearing on how our stories are picked. And remember, when you're giving the story, you're giving the story because you would like to influence, inspire, and inform people. Sorry about that small distraction. It had taken away my thinking skills, so it had taken away my 2 words. That's what good communication does. And when we were talking the last time, we talked about some tips for impactful communication. That is where we begin our conversation today. In that descriptive story of your upbringing, there are a few things that you've let us know about you that we didn't know, which is good. Good communication always produces impactful results and moves masses in either the positive or negative way. And why do I say positive or negative way? I can inspire people to come behind me because they are having conversation and they run to work. And they can also inspire people to be destructive. Both the positive and the negative follow the same rules of communication. So what are the 3 tips, 3 key tips that you can give us for impactful communication?
So let me give an example of how communication can inspire quote unquote negative action. Remember Adolf Hitler? Adolf Hitler was a master communicator because based on his articulation of the needs of the people at that point, he was able to rally a whole nation to hate another nation of people and also to participate in the extermination. When you look at history, when you look at politicians, many of them are very articulate. Look at Martin Luther King Jr. Communication, the I have a dream speech is consistently being, well, I don't know about the current generations, but in our generations, it was consistently referred to, right? So what we must understand as a people is that communication is so powerful. And like you rightly said, it can flip people to do good and evil. Like that on a dime, all right? So a couple of things that we must do, the 3 tips you've asked for is 1, let us learn to listen to understand. Many of us listen to respond, right? I'm listening to Joe so that I have the right answer. So I'm not quite listening to hear because I can hear the nonverbals. I can hear his tone. I can hear the sigh he makes. So I'm listening to respond, not listening to understand. So that's the first one. Always listen to understand, even if it's a viewpoint that is counter to everything you know or you work for. Because the reality is our meaning is internal and individual. And I believe I said that the last time. So my ability to process an issue is clouded by my experience, right? So if you say, but that was so silly, if my mother always called me silly, it will take me back to the first time she called me that, and I will now begin to process that, and I will determine that Joe doesn't like me. The end. Whereas you could have used that in jest. So like common phrase we like to use is goat, greatest of all time. In certain circles, you call someone a goat, if they're on certain trajectories of faith, they will see like you're telling them that they're not lovable by God and they will end up in hell. Right? So that person will listen to you through the lens of their knowledge. Okay? So we must listen to understand the other person. The other thing we must do is then take the information and the feedback that they have given us and use it. If we're communicating with customers, use that information to realign, to iterate, and to reposition ourselves. In a common conversation, it will be like, I didn't mean that. This is what I meant. And many times, because we live in a generation where we assume that if Joe doesn't agree with me, then he hates me. we don't stop to have those conversations. But I've learned to ask, okay, what exactly did you mean? Like, if you listen to me when I'm having conversations, I'm like, so let me clarify. You said this, this, this. So do you mean this? And it makes conversations a lot more intense. So if you're a lazy communicator, it will annoy you. You'll walk away and you'll go away with your thought processes. Or you will stop and have the conversation and realize, actually, Joe didn't mean anything by calling me silly. Because you see, when we were growing up, old British idioms, when you're being naughty, you're called a silly goose. So for me, it could just be that, but for Joe, it could be Amenitusi. She has abused me, you know. So those are the things we must do. We must then use the feedback or the information we get to realign, iterate, and reposition. And finally, we must, in especially the buying and selling conversation, we must ensure we resonate, because people listen to us, follow us, buy from us when they know, like, and trust us. So we must build those three. If people are like, she just talks her mouth, she's not bothered about people's opinions, she doesn't care, people wouldn't listen. But if people know that even when I'm firm, like I work with teens and I'm very firm with them, and one day I didn't go for an event and they asked, why isn't she here? We feel safe. So I'm like, but I'm nyoroshaing you guys all the time. I'm disciplining you guys all the time. And they said, we feel safe when you're around. So then over time, they have understood my communication style is not because I don't like them. It is simply because they are too valuable for me to let them do stupid things. So then I'm firm in our conversations and the like. So you must listen to understand, use the information to realign, iterate, and reposition, and then ensure that you resonate with whichever audience you're talking to.
Thank you very much. Resonate with the audience.
Yes.
The meaning is always internal and individual. This conversation is a build-up to our masterclass at AMC. So if meaning is internal and individual, it means when you are communicating to inspire, there must be things you should look out for. Every time you're communicating, you're representing your brand. Am I wrong?
No, you're right.
Your story communicates, your story resonates with your brand, right? You and brand resonate, you and brand are together. It's like if we were to remove James Mwangi from Equity, it won't, looks like there's something missing in that conversation.
Yes.
Why? I think he was with it from inception. Or if we were
Yes.
to remove Morioki from Cooperative Bank, he's been there from 2001 when it was in the doldrums and no one wanted to deal with Cooperative Bank. So it resonates with the person. And I think that's when people stand up to speak. They say, these are my views, not the views of the company I work for, not the views of my family, not the views of my extended clan from Timbuktu to South Africa.
Yeah.
What guidelines can you share with us that will ensure that your communication flows effectively? And because meaning is internal and individual, as they pick the meaning, they will pick what it is you would like them to understand when you're narrating the story.
Yes. So even let me add one more dimension about popular brands that we need to think about. There's no Tesla without Elon Musk. So when you think about your brand, you have to think about it like that. As the founder of the brand, you are instrumental to the brand feel, and you're instrumental to the story until you fully pass it on to the next person. So let me give an example. I am the co-founder of AMC. So until Joe and I as co-founders get everything right and out, we are instrumental to the brand. Once we have teams, we are instrumental to keeping the information shared about the brand concise. As we grow, we'll probably get a PRO, a PR officer, a corporate communications team, who will draw from what we have put together and further the communication depending on the stakeholder we're dealing with. Remember, we said we tell our brand story all the time in every conversation. So every time you meet me, how I dress, how I look, how I deal with people says a lot about me as Chosubire and the brands I represent. So communication is about so much more than the words we speak, all right? It has to do with how we show up, what our attitude is, what our mood is, what our dressing looks like. I meet young people who say, oh, I want to wear jeans and a t-shirt every day, like Zuckerberg. I said he has earned the right to dress like that. However, every time you see him go for a Senate hearing, he wears a navy blue suit or a gray suit with a white tie and a white shirt, and a light blue tie. Why? In that space, he cannot show up in jeans and a t-shirt. Okay, so what are the seven? I call them the 7 C's of communication. And some will be for verbal, some will be for non-verbal, but we'll go through them anyway. So the first C is clear. You must be clear, and I like to apply clear to speech. You must be well-spoken. Now, this is a special note for Kenyans. Kenyans have a habit of laughing at people who speak with accents. Every dialect across the globe has a way it interfaces with English and affects it. However, we don't laugh at Germans, at the French when they don't speak English properly. But amongst our peers, Kenyans, we are known for that. And this is important because as long as the person on the other side understands you, you are clear. Clarity is not about your accent. It's about the use of words. So I could be somebody from Central with my LR problems. I could be somebody from Ukambani Eastern with the H problem. Because you know how the Kambas, where there's a H, they take it out. Where there's none, they put it in. But can I understand? Is what they're saying clear enough for me to understand beyond their accent? So clarity is about the selection of words, the simplicity of your expressions. It would be crazy for me to go and talk to a 1-year-old using acronyms like ESG, SDG. They don't understand it. But if I tell them we're trying to make sure that when the sun shines, it doesn't burn us, we want to make sure that the world lives forever, for a long time, because forever and ever is a context they don't understand. So clear, you're well-spoken, you've chosen the right words, you've chosen the right idioms, proverbs, expressions for the audience. Next is concise. Many of us are long-winded. We talk, get to the point, ne? Because the average attention span is very short. And sometimes when somebody is long-winded, I can tell where their logical thought process ends and when the rest is just talking to fill gaps. This is specifically important when you're on a panel. You're asked to give one reason why X works or doesn't work, and you talk for the next half hour. Concise doesn't mean you don't know. It means you have sieved what you know and pulled out the most critical. Concise also allows you to be appreciated by more. For instance, let me use social media. You have limitations. LinkedIn allows you 1,300 characters. Other sites allow you more or less. X allows you less. I learned to be concise by doing conversations on X when it used to be called Twitter. Because then we had 164 characters. where a character includes space, punctuation, everything. So you needed to be able to get your point down to 164 characters, which is very often about 75 words or less. It also included the hashtags you needed to put in for visibility and all that. Concise is important even for your elevator pitch or your first, that introduction. So I ask business owners, always ask them to reduce the explanation of their business down to 75 words. Now, you will not say everything in the 75 words, but you would say the most critical things that will attract attention, and then people will ask you questions. So concise is short enough, brief enough to grab attention, but leave room for asking questions. Number 3 is concrete, which means it has to be evidence-based. If I sit here and I say that 95% of MSMEs create all the employment, what's my backing? Is there a study to back it? Have I done the research? Am I borrowing a Harvard, World Bank, Joe Mukoko research? But it's evidence-based. When I say most customers will not respond to this, what's the evidence of that? Is it somebody else's study? Is it my interaction in the market? When things are evidence-based, you present them differently. So you must be clear, you must be concise, you must be concrete. Number 4 is correct. Many of us say things that are wishful thinking, and there's this thing of fake it till you make it. I don't quite believe in that, and I'll tell you why. If I come and I tell you that we have already impacted 1,000 business owners, is that the truth? No, it's not. Another thing I find a lot of business people do is like, but Mary has done this thing. Let's take her data and use it. It will catch up with you. It will catch up with you eventually. So I tell guys, speak the truth. Sometimes speaking the truth, and that is the way it's correct, it may limit your options now, but it gives you greater options later. I don't know how else to explain that, because so many times we are so driven by what we must get now, we lose sight of later. And business owners, we are building for a lasting brand. If you're a brand like Coca-Cola that's over 200 years old, they have a history. They have a way they've always done things. They have a way they deal with complaints. And they can tell you, this is who we are, this is who we are not. I can never forget the day when I was doing a project with Coca-Cola, and somebody asked me, what is Coca-Cola's primary product? And I said, soda. And they said, no, that's the bottler's primary product. What is Coca-Cola Global? What's their primary product? And who are their target market? Only to learn that Coca-Cola Global, their primary product is concentrate, which they sell to the bottlers who, using the specific recipe, make the sodas. That's why pretty much a Coke across the globe will taste the same. Things like Fanta have minor taste differences, but there's a standard recipe because the concentrate is made in one laboratory, and 3 or 4 people across the globe at any given time are the maximum number of people who know that recipe for the concentrate. So if you asked anybody anything about the taste of Coke, we can all speak the same thing. Make sense? When you look at the advertising, what they say is it brings you together, joins communities, makes us have fun, makes us feel warm. That's the truth. Because we'll always have a drink around. Either I'm thirsty or I want to hang out with my friends. So your communication, you must tell the truth. That would be number 5. Number 5, it has to be coherent. It has to be logical and rational. I think in a day and age where we exaggerate a lot of things, I would rather err on the side of coherent, because the internet doesn't forget. And we go out and we say all these things, we recorded about all these things. And then one day, and I think you've seen it a lot here in Kenya, somebody says something, and then guys go and do the meme of 5 days ago they said, 2 days before that they said. So we have to be very careful about what we put out. It has to be rational, it has to be logical. And of course, like we've just said before this, it has to be the truth. And then it has to be complete. When you're going to talk to people, don't leave gaps. So first of all, there will never be a question. Sorry to use a double negative. So every time you speak, somebody will always have a question about what you've said. But make sure when you're speaking to people, you don't leave gaps. I would advise that we do notes, and that's what I like to do. I do speaking notes. So just bullet points of the things I must cover to be completely understandable and logical. Why is that important? It reduces the amount of questions, the number of questions that come to you, but it also helps you be more effective in your communication. And finally, communications should be courteous. You need to be gracious and polite. You need to be kind to people. You need to be compassionate. Courteous doesn't mean that you take everybody's nonsense. No, it doesn't mean that. It doesn't mean that you become a doormat. It doesn't mean that people trample over you. Courteous means the way you speak is respectful. Now, there are always going to be people who come at you disrespectfully. You should never reduce yourself to their level. There are people who are just nasty by choice. Even if you come at me nasty, I wouldn't come back at you nasty. Because why? So that we prove that we are both, no, I wouldn't do that. There is a place in communication where if you cannot resolve it amicably, one of you must walk away. Now, contrary to common belief, the person who walks away is not the weak person. It is easier to fight. It is easier to throw words at one another. But because we don't want people to think we are weak, we always rise to the place of fighting. Courteous means you weigh the situation and you figure out, is it worth being aggressive and fighting about? You can take a firm stand, be resolute in your decision, but still courteous. And I'll give an example. I was once building a company with a friend of mine. It was really hard. And I was her project manager for events. And we had an event out of town. And we made a major goof. We had some things to be delivered from another town that didn't come in the right quantities and the right way. So we woke up in the morning of the event with a mess from here to Timbuktu and back. I went into the briefing meeting, and these are CEOs and CFOs and COOs. And I had to report that not only do we have a goof, but the people affected by the goof are them and their international delegates. So what eventually happened, there's no word I didn't hear in that meeting. And it would have been easy for me to get angry and rise to their level. But what I had learned to do by then is to choose my battles. So I came in and I said, this is the problem, and the room erupted. And I said, ladies and gentlemen, may I complete what I have to say? This is the path to resolution, and we should be back on track by 12 noon. This was like 7:10 in the morning. So they went back on complaining, fussing, and I interrupted the room again and I said, ladies and gentlemen, is there anything else I need to know? Or can I go back to the trenches with my team? I was project manager. Our CEO was not yet in town. So of course, all the flack ended up with me. What happened by that level of communication is, for 2 seconds, I diffused the situation. They said nothing else. I said, thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I'll see you at 10 o'clock. And I left the room. It was less than half an hour that one of them came and asked me if I'd had breakfast, because we had been in the trenches since 5 a.m. resolving the challenge. And he asked me, how do you remain so calm? Communication from a place of courtesy can diffuse situations that are absolutely volatile. If you remember Kofi Annan's demeanor when he was negotiating here in Kenya with post-election violence in 2007, he was the most irritatingly calm man. And he was kind and he was courteous. We don't know what he did behind doors, but every time we saw him and we were in a state of upheaval, you'd listen to him and he says, we have not yet arrived, but we have made progress. And you'd feel, okay, you'd feel calm. So that is why I end with courteous. But your communication should be clear, which is well-spoken, concise, which is short, concrete, which is evidence-based, correct, meaning you speak the truth, coherent, which means it's logical and rational, complete, it has no gaps, and courteous, it is kind to people. I want to make one assertion, one deviation on coherent. Sometimes when we're in the middle of an emotional crisis and we're talking to our counselors, we are not coherent. That place you're allowed not to be coherent, because as you pour it out, you will make sense of it. But that's to your counselor. Let's never let our emotions get the better of us to make us vile, nasty people. Back to you, Joe.
Thank you, Chesubere. Those were loaded 7 C's. One of my key takeouts is about the completeness of the message. That way your audience gets a grasp of everything that is happening, challenges, the good, the bad, and the in-between, as we like saying here, the good, the bad, and the in-between, because it helps them be able to not only be better informed, but inspired to take action where you need assistance. That was huge. That was huge. That was huge. And this is a good build-up to the AMC Masterclass on Founder's Vision. The details will be here below in the description box and in our social media spaces. Make sure that you follow us, not only subscribe to this, but also plug in and get to hear more about how storytelling changes not only your life, but the lives of the communities and societies you have chosen to serve as a human being, in whatever capacity you've chosen to serve, especially as a business person putting out products in the market. What is your key takeout, Chesube?
My parting shot, and I draw it from something you've just
lovely,
said.
Wonderful.
You have talked about our role is to inspire people to take action, despite who our stakeholders are. And I think for me, it comes back to we must be clear as leaders what we want to say. So that means that as I'm processing, because these 7 things mean I need to process through and think through and prepare. Let's be deliberate to prepare and think through our communications. Many times we have a crisis, and in the place of crisis, please look for a crisis communications person. But we have to think ahead. We have to think about what are the possible groups we need to talk to? What are the possible things we need to say? Build your story in advance. Build it in advance so that when you enter the situation, you have a game plan. And I'll give you an example. I learned to drive when I was 18. That was a rule in our house. There was a car. My dad gave the worst car for kids, man. It had no handbrake. It's manual steering. That time they're doing power. It was just a mess, and not a bad mess. But if you learned to drive that car, there's no car you couldn't drive. But as you learned it, because of all the faults in it, you actually, by default, learned defensive driving. Because it wasn't the kind of car that if you touched the brake, like my mom's car, if you touched her brake with your big toe, it would stop. This other one needed pumping brakes, maneuvering, and it was manual. So you're balancing there, you're balancing your clutch, your brake. I mean, it could be a nightmare. But driving that car prepared me for later experience. And I remember I was in 2004. My dad had an accident in 2003, so he still couldn't drive. That morning, my mom woke up with her blood pressure was off the charts, so she couldn't drive. And dad was preaching at a church in Nakuru. So we drove, and because I was always discussing scenarios, if this happens, what do you do? Just after Gilgil, as you descend to do the climb to Kikope, I braked and the car started spinning. Let me tell you, the thing that saved me was my brother's voice in my head that said, when you spin, take momentum away from the car. And you do it in several ways. You brake, or you step off the gas and let the engine die. Now, because I had braked and that started the spin, what's my other option? To let go of the accelerator pedal. And then he had always said the third thing was ensure you don't hit gravel at speed, or you will roll. So number one is eliminated. I can't brake. All right. So I focused on, so I let go of the accelerator pedal. And then I focused on when it swerves right, I cut left. So I just focused on doing that until the engine died and we were facing across the road. So we just slid off the road. We didn't have an accident. Why do I use that as an example here? Because I had prepared in advance for scenarios. When the scenario hit, I had the plan. Same thing for communications. Think about when you're going to be speaking to your team, prepare. When you speak to a customer, prepare. And even in your customer conversations, you have your high net worth customers, mid, low. It's different presentation skills, different combinations of stories. When you're going to speak to a regulator, whoever it is, these 7 things take processing and advanced preparation. So like I always tell business leaders, prepare your story in advance and know for teams, this is the iteration. For customers, we go like this. For who, we go like this. So you have variations of the same story. It is the same story, but you have variants depending on where you're going. For instance, at AMC, we have a business class, but we have the teens edition, we have the youth edition, and we've got the adult edition. Why? Because every audience is slightly different from the rest. So take time to prepare in advance, and you won't go wrong.
There you have it. From the citizen of the world who learned to speak at 9 months and walk at 9 months. This place has got amazing stories. This has been the 360-degree brand story. And the end of this conversation is the beginning of our conversation, next episode, on building a culture of storytelling in everything that we do. But before we get to that episode, kindly, below there's a button, register for the Founders Vision class, masterclass being hosted by AMC, and we shall see you in class. We are glad to work with you, glad to talk to you. Engage us on the chat space, engage us on our social media handles. If there's something, a question, a burning question, How can I work at 9 months? Or how can I drive at 2 years? Put it down there on chat. We shall definitely get back to you. I have been your host, Joe Mukoko. Looking forward to another interesting conversation on spinning around and taking charge as you spin around. 360-degree brand story signing out. Thank you. Have a good day. Have a good night. Have a successful day, whichever time zone you're in. Thank you.